Hello and welcome to the Malmaison Hotel in Manchester and the latest of our Broadcast Revolution events. We have an audience in front of us here today, but I know several hundred are joining us remotely as we're live streaming this. So hello to you watching at the office or at home or wherever you are. My name is Mike Young. I joined Broadcast Revolution around 18 months ago after 20 plus years as a producer, presenter, reporter at the BBC, largely at Radios 4 and at 5 Live. Just down from the road from us here is Salford's Media City, where I used to work, and it's actually 10 years now since the BBC relocated 5 Live, BBC Sport, BBC Breakfast, BBC Children's, many Radio 4 and other network programmes to there. It keeps growing too. The latest additions are the new BBC Work and Money team, what was called the business unit when it was based in London. I was one of those who moved up with 5 Live's breakfast programme when we left Television Centre at Shepherd's Bush in West London back in 2011, and also making that move to Media City with not 5 Live Breakfast, you were Newsroom in those days, weren't you? Yeah. Newsroom. Mm-hmm. Is our guest, who I will be introducing very shortly. Before we meet our guest formally, a couple of points of order for you. For those watching the live stream, if you would like to ask a question of our guest today, you can do so via our Twitter account. Now that's at BroadcastRevo. At BroadcastRevo is our Twitter account, and I will read that question out for you. Or you can ask a question or join the chat using the hashtag Join the Broadcast Revolution. If you're in the room and you have a question at any point, just stick up your hand, wave. I'll try and keep looking up for you. And we don't have a microphone for you particularly, but what I'll do is I'll listen to your question and I'll say it again to Pete, if that's okay. So that's the way we'll do it, both in the room and for you at home or in the office. By the way, anyone who does ask a question automatically gets entered into a quarterly draw for a free Broadcast for Good campaign. This is where we will deliver a free campaign to a charity of your choice on your behalf. This will be drawn at the end of this month. Now, our guest today is Pete Wilson. He is the editor of BBC Radio 4's consumer programme, that's You and Yours, which has been on air for just over 50 years now. Pete's been working on You and Yours for close to 8 years. About that, yeah. Yeah, first as a senior producer, so has a lot of experience filling the content of that programme. And for the last 2.5 years, basically the entire pandemic, editor of the programme. So the old editor got out just in the nick of time. So before that, as I mentioned, Pete was at Radio 5 Live for several years. He's also worked at the BBC's main radio newsroom in London, still in London. And he's also been at BBC Radio London in your time, local Radio Land, and at BBC WM in Birmingham as well. Yeah. So even at questions not around You and Yours, if you have a local radio question or a 5 Live question, you've got experience, you've probably got a view as well. Yeah. You can give us your best view on it. For the uninitiated then, let's talk about You and Yours first of all. What does You and Yours do? It's on air now, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll talk about Thursdays in a minute. Yeah. And the Friday programme doesn't exist, so you've got a Monday to Wednesday You and Yours programme. What's it raison d'être? Well, when it first set out, it was looking at straight consumer affairs. That's kind of what it was. Anything, that was market-driven, product-driven, anything like that. We've gone through quite a big relaunch in the past year to 18 months. I won't go through all the details, but BBC has Compare and Contrast. We went out to Compare and Compete, rather. We went out to compete, so other places could bid for us. They could try and get the programme. We kept it in-house with a bid that was put forward that we concentrated on the Jerry Maguire principle. Show me the money. Everything that we now do is about the money. Where people spend it, where people want you to spend it, the services that you would be paying for, things like that. It has to be shown that there is some kind of outlay in it, some kind of idea that you're spending what you have earned. And then kind of the slight twist in it, which we'll talk about more on the Thursday, I guess, is we then invite people to come and talk to us where they want you to spend your money with them. So they've got a product or service. We talk to them about how they got started. How often does this happen at the BBC? Because, people will look back to the days of John Burt as Director General, and there was a lot of internal competition, internal markets or whatever. But what's happening a lot at the BBC now is external production companies are invited to actually, do you fancy producing something like You and Yours?
Yeah.
Well, okay, give us a pitch and we will consider it. And if we like you, this happened with Songs of Praise, for example. Songs of Praise was an internal production, BBC Religion, below our office in You and Yours, and now it's made externally.
It is, and I think the push is to get to at least 60% of all radio output will have at least been offered. It's not necessarily made by the independents, but it'll go through this bidding process. So in effect, what the You and Yours team became under BBC Audio North, because that's our department as we work in Media City, in effect, we almost became like an independent production company that now services the BBC with what we make as You and Yours.
That sounds like quite a lot, but I suppose in the end this is all about the BBC. That licence fee retention is the order of the day still, and you've got to be seen to be outside of London a great deal.
Absolutely.
That's Media City, but also opening up to external production companies in quite a big way.
Yeah, but I think it's easy to say you've got to be seen to do that. I think the issue is that we should have been doing that anyway. And I think that's what, as you said in your introduction, both of us moved up 11 years ago now, this year. And I think what actually happened when, certainly from my point of view, when we moved up, was suddenly realise how many stories you just do because you're in London, therefore it's about London.
Yes.
That's always been the driving force. Whereas now it's not. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not stupid enough to think we sit in Salford Quays, so therefore we ask somebody in Manchester and that matters to people in Mansfield or wherever. It's not going to be the panacea to say, well, we're part of the people now, we're in Manchester. But you do have to get out of that mindset of what happens in London is the most important thing. And certainly the way in which we approach stories now, who we try and contact, who we try and include in it, what the voices that we try and do, it's far more driven to actually understand what people really want as opposed to what we all think. And I think it is almost that Westminster bubble but extended, that W1A bubble almost, to try and get away from that mindset of what's in London is so important. It matters to everybody, we should try and get those anyway.
So You and Yours, a consumer programme, to someone who'd never heard of it, when I was working on it, I'd say, okay, imagine Watchdog, which was a brand that people were aware of, but on the radio.
Yeah.
And that was roughly it.
That's roughly what the push was, yeah. And it was, you had lots of people, lots of post-bag stories. We both worked on them often enough of my washing machine's not working, what do I manage to do about it, things like that. It's evolved in that we're not there to try and solve all those bits. We're not there to do the smallest part of it. But by and large, if something's gone wrong, it's probably not just one person.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a lot wider than that.
Yeah.
So you're trying to figure out, well, what has gone wrong? Is that a product fault there? So therefore, there's a company that needs to be held to account.
Yes.
Is there a system that's gone wrong? What is it that we need to achieve, and what do we have to try and get to there? We're not, as I said, we're not there to try and solve everybody's problem, but what we try and do now is give you the tools so that you can go and do that yourself.
Yeah.
We'll tell you where to start. And there are doors, frankly, that we can manage to open because you say, hi, I'm from BBC Radio 4's You and Yours programme.
Yeah.
They're going to respond to us a bit quickly.
There's a role for the consumer champion, I think, much more well defined now through Watchdog in its time, Martin Lewis, of course, and You and Yours has always been there, and you've evolved and shaped really, as someone like Martin Lewis has maybe become a consumer champion. You and Yours can say, well, we've been doing that for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think that's where we got a little bit lost because we kept putting our hand up and said, but we did that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We might have done it, but nobody actually realised that we've done it. And then the new people come forward.
Yes.
And that's where it's not a criticism of what we've done in the past, but it was, right, we've done this, we don't need to do it again.
Yes.
And actually, you do.
You do.
Because that problem hasn't necessarily disappeared just because we've looked at it 1 week in February.
Yeah.
In 4 years ago or whatever. You have to go back to that and say, has that been fixed? Did it work?
Yeah.
Has that problem gone away? If it hasn't, what do we then have to step in and try and help with and try and point people in the right direction on?
I mean, some of the powerful content that you and I produced before you became editor, and I left, there was no link.
No connection. No,
I mean, you would see, for instance, fire safety became an enormously serious issue. I mean, I remember, we were getting, as you say, an email would come in going, my fridge freezer burst into flames. Well, if you're on a block of flats and post Grenfell, it's highlighting now more than ever
thing.
just how serious these things are. And actually, it's amazing how that snowballs into really quite powerful campaigns.
Yeah, you know, and we've got different ones that we've worked on in the past. We looked at gambling and how that's gone through. There was a law change done over what You and Yours looked at, and that was driven through by one of the other producers that we work with. She was at a point that she was given evidence before a parliamentary committee on it.
Yeah.
You know, there are some very powerful things that we can manage to do and manage to push at. It's not blowing our own trumpet because, you know, somebody has to come to us with that problem first.
Yes.
All we're doing is trying to make sure that they've got a voice, they can manage to get that issue out there, and somebody's actually paying attention.
So there we go. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. Now, you're on the air at midday, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, but Tuesday is a phone-in.
Tuesday's a call programme, yeah.
And is that a consumer phone-in? Because certainly in our time producing it,
Yeah.
it was really a general phone-in. It could almost be any question being asked.
It was weird. We did try and do that bit when you and I were doing it, of looking at wider things and whatever the biggest subject of the day was, should we get people to talk about that? And that was fine, but then because of the changes that have gone through on You and Yours and this idea of, you know, trying to streamline it that little bit more, and also looking at what the news agenda is around, because I'd argue right now, with the exception of whatever the Conservatives are doing on the leadership battle, there aren't many bigger stories than consumer news. You know, it's all about the cost of living, the rise in prices. Can you afford to put petrol in your car to get to work? Can you afford to buy the food that you want? There are lots and lots of things that are going on, and you think, well, actually, we can talk to people about that, and people should come and talk to us about it. And it's also then trying to use that call process, not just of, oh, woe is me, I can't manage to do this, but actually use it as advice. So when people turn around and say, well, I can't do this, but I found a way of getting around it by doing this, not breaking the law, obviously, but, you know, different ways in which they've managed to address some of the problems that they've got, you share it.
Yeah.
And you share it on the programme. And therefore, other people come in and say, well, that's a good idea. Actually, I've tried this. And then you get a community going. So it's not, you know, call was great in the fact that you got to talk about the subject that was around. Now we've got to a group of people that almost feels like a community, which we didn't really get to that well before.
Interesting.
And now it's at the point where, you know, if something happens and there's a big policy thing that changes, or a big consumer cost of living change that's been announced that morning by politicians on the Today programme, we can go back to the people that have got in contact with us through call and say, how's that going to affect you?
Yeah.
And that's the bit that I think we're managing to have a bit of a difference on now. Our output stands out because we don't necessarily want to talk about the policy. We actually want to talk about the people that are affected by it.
The impact. Yeah.
And get that voice across. And then when you have the likes of one of the big policy negotiators, when they come on, one of the big decision makers, Winifred or Peter or whoever's presenting, they've actually got the ammunition to go at the person, not because we want to savage them, but the questions that you can put forward, they've actually come from somebody real, as opposed to us sitting in an office thinking, well, what do we think we want to ask this week?
I mean, you and I both in our time used to produce the 5 Live phone-in that Nikki Campbell presents, and that was very much opinion-led in the era where we were doing it. You would have quite a row maybe at the start of the programme between two guests, and then you would roll with the reactions. The You and Yours phone-in, and it sounds like it's continued to be and evolved under your editorship, really, is much more about experience.
Yeah, it has to be where something has happened.
Yeah.
I don't really want people to come on and give their opinion about things, because in the context of what we're looking at, you don't solve anything. You just end up with people having a row.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a lot of heat and not really a lot of light. It's not going to get you in the direction that you want to go. As I said, it's kind of the solution process that we want to get to, how you manage to work out the problems that you've got. And as I said, it really is trying to get to the point that people sit down and talk together to get to that bit. So it's a different approach to what you want to do on 5 Live. Nicky's really good at what he does on that one. We've worked with him often enough. We know that he can manage to do those bits. But it's not quite the same way in what we're looking at doing. There are some subjects that they do that are the same as the ones that we would do. I've heard them. I know what they can do on them. They're very good. It's just, on occasions, it's a different approach as to how we want to get there.
You and Yours isn't a business programme, though, is it? And I think that's always important to understand, because, I mean, you know, Radio 4 has Moneybox, and there is a phone-in linked to Moneybox, so that there are money issues that are tackled by them. So there is a big difference there. What would you describe as the typical listener? There's 3 million people listening.
Yep.
to You and Yours. So it's a massive audience, a big audience.
Yeah. I think we're about the fifth on the network at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's,
Today's programme sits at about 6.5 million.
Yeah. So they're always high. Then it's World at 1, PM, us, and Woman's Hour. Kind of the news ones do get a bit more than we do because why would you not tune in and find out what's been happening that day? But the other ones were about the 3 million mark, so thereabouts.
And when you factor in that something like BBC Breakfast Television gets around 1 million a day, you're getting 3 times that audience between midday and 1 on Radio 4. So it's a big audience. But what is the typical You and Yours listener? How old is that listener?
Do you mean how old is the listener or how old is the one that we want to get? Because there's probably a bit of a difference, but we can understand that.
I think
part.
the BBC, what's that great word? Replenishes.
Yes,
okay.
replenishes.
You're trying to find someone younger, but how old is the average listener at the moment?
At the moment, profile is slightly more female than male as far as listeners go. Not much in it, actually. Not as big as it used to be. It's a few percentage points in it. Age-wise, late 50s to early 60s.
Okay. So youth is very much what you're targeting, and I know that there is a Thursday option for that, which we'll get to in a moment. What are the ingredients of a You and Yours programme that make it work? What do you like to be in that programme? Because sort of people watching this right now there's going to be brands, there's going to be charities. We've got some questions coming through on Twitter for you. But what do you like when you're looking at the menu at the top of a programme? What should be in that programme?
You kind of, it's like any other programme really, you want a variety that's in there. Invariably we try, possibly the only programme that tries to put 2 lead items in there, 2 main stories, because we want one at the top. But if we're really honest, our big audience is towards the end of the programme because that's building up to the World at One bit. So, we build an audience towards that programme, they then get their audience coming in, so we want something that anchors people to come back to us and listen to there, so we try and put something in there. We do want it to be, it's the catch of being the 50-year-old sitting as the editor. I need younger stories, stories about younger things in there. I love watching Stranger Things. I'm not necessarily the target audience. But when we did the item yesterday, including Stranger Things fans, and talked about product placement that was in there and why that was important and what, again, those people wanted you to spend your money on, that's in a different approach than I would have been necessarily doing on my own. But because I've got a younger team, we can manage to do that. So it's trying to tap into different stories that are around that more of the moment really, as I suppose, as to some of the more traditional stuff that you would necessarily assume that we would look at. It has to be younger. We have to get younger facing on it.
Okay. Questions coming through for you via our Twitter account, which is @BroadcastRevo, if you want to send your questions through there. Or indeed, you can ask a question, join the chat, the hashtag Join the Broadcast Revolution, the way to do that. And by all means, do stick up your hands if there's anything you wanted to shout out throughout. Be glad to ask. Question to you from Katie King. Are you interested in pitches from charities about the cost of living crisis's impact on people with a specific condition or disease? So that narrows it right down. I mean, I think Katie's hit maybe on probably the fact that that's the biggest consumer story at the moment, the cost of living crisis.
Yes, it is. And she's right, Katie, we do welcome pitches from charities. We looked quite heavily this week at the rising cost of being disabled. So
there is a disability remit for You and Yours, or there used to be.
Yeah. It wasn't actually included in the pitch. It wasn't actually included when we came to going for the renewal because it wasn't mentioned in any of the documents. But again, I don't see a reason why we don't do that one. Again, it boils down to the same thing. Show me the money. Yeah. There are services that are provided there. It's a cost. There are things that are included in the fact that you are disabled that means that it is expensive. And there's no reason why I wouldn't look at that. So yeah, we do look at that part. We do work quite closely with charities as well because they do have people that we can talk to on the programme. They put us in touch with people who are struggling to get by. I'm not saying that we want to go, that I have a fear right across media at the minute that there's almost a chase to the bottom, that everybody's out to find the most destitute person that you can find, that they really can't afford to do anything, and it's almost like poverty tourism, and I don't want to do that bit. What I'm really trying to find in my programme is the people who thought, yeah, I'm all right, I'm fine. and then suddenly this cost of living has gone up, and you start to tip over a little bit, and then you tip a little bit more, and then you realize that, you know, like anybody else, it doesn't matter what your salary is, you spend your salary. So your cost and what you spend your money on per month is kind of covered by that. And suddenly it's going to cost you more. So things that you cannot do and cannot live without, there are services that you want to keep, you have to cut something. It's those people that we want to find. But certainly the idea of talking to people about how difficult it is to get by right now, any approach is welcome.
I'll ask you a fair bit about sort of pitching, basically, external pitches coming at you, and I'm sure there are plenty. There'll be plenty of broadcast advisories and press releases reach you, and I'm sure you delete the majority.
I'll read them.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily ones I follow up on all the time, but I'm quite happy to talk about what makes them stand out if you want.
Let's say, going back to Katie's point, if she was pitching to you, for example, do you want a charity to approach you with the all-important case study, the real person that's affected? Do you actually want a chief executive sort of level offer? What do you actually want from an organisation, charity or business?
I don't think you can put the two together, if I'm honest. I think charities offer something that businesses can't.
Interesting.
I think when you get to a charity, they will come primarily with people who are affected by what they're talking about. And that, as I said, is the bit that I want to get to. I don't want it just to be some, sorry to pigeonhole anybody, but I don't want some guy in a suit that tells me what's going on. I want the person who's affected to tell me what it's actually like. That primarily will come from the fact that a charity will tell me not only can they offer their chief exec, but they can offer somebody who will tell us what it really is like and what they're going through. Businesses are different. Businesses by all means can come with us with, especially, again, we'll talk about the Thursday bit, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily in a position where they're offering the real person. Not because they put somebody out, I don't mean it's false, I mean it's just they've got a product rather than a person at the end of it. So it's difficult to
It's like on A-level results day, we were always offered on A-level results day somebody who got straight A's. And actually it's just nice to hear from somebody sometimes who actually hasn't got straight A's.
No, they did all right, got to where they wanted to be, that's fine. But you know, it was always the joke that when you went through the broadsheets on A-level day, you knew what photos were going to be there. It was all the nice schools with the nice pupils that did really nicely. Sometimes you want a bit more grit than that. In fact, primarily I do want more grit than that. I don't want it to be showy. That's
an interesting point, actually. I mean, Radio 4 could be accused of almost being, you know, a bastion of all things Britishness and whatever. I mean, are you trying to kind of get the voices on that haven't been heard on Radio 4, perhaps historically over the years?
Yeah, it has to be that. And I think as well there's, you know, as I said, typical audience member at the moment, late 50s to early 60s. It's no secret that there's a drive across the BBC to try and find the replenishers, the younger audience. Don't get me wrong, I'm not stupid enough to think that 16-year-olds are going to trip over themselves to listen to you and yours every day. But I do want it to be somewhere around the mid-30s to 40s. That's where we should be aiming towards. Okay. That's kind of the place that we want to try and get to. Yeah, I think you need to get the other voices on. You cannot just be that it's the traditional home counties, whichever way we want to put this one, what you associate a Radio 4 audience to be. It can't be that anymore. It needs to move on.
Brett actually asked an interesting question via our Twitter account, and he says, we were talking about compare and compete, the way the BBC kind of hears from external production companies, and up to a point it's probably a good thing if those aren't in London and aren't in Salford, because Brett's point is, what can be done to make sure the BBC can't be accused of being London or Salford centric? Yeah. Because that does have, there's an enormous amount of programmes. I mean, how many people are employed in Salford, a Media City now? I mean, it's in the thousands.
It's in the thousands and growing. You know, it's still going. So you know, as I said earlier, that this is no panacea to turn around and say, oh, we're in Salford, we're across the UK now. We're not. No. You know, it needs to be the other bits. I concentrate on that bit because that's where I'm based, that's where my home department is. Yeah. But it has to be in the other ones, and I know that Radio 4 has just gone through the commissioning editor positions, and they're bringing in new staff for that. One of the briefs in there is that it's not just looking at London and Salford, but it's looking at the new base in Bristol. It's looking at Glasgow and what's up there, but it's also looking at Belfast and what's coming out from over that side, looking at Cardiff and how that's developing. Again, even if you name those places, just because it's in Glasgow doesn't mean that it means that much to anybody in Dundee or Aberdeen. It's not a solution to all the problems, but certainly you have to get to the point that it's recognised. You know, I pay quite a bit of attention to what the audience figures are and where we broadcast to. I still know that Radio 4 base is primarily south, but it's better than it was. But there are still parts that Radio 4 doesn't manage to get to. There might be local radio issues, like Radio Ulster is really strong in Northern Ireland. They, through Stephen Nolan, they have their own consumer champion. I'm not necessarily expecting they're going to come and listen to me. They've got somebody who's doing that for them on their local radio station. But nonetheless, you can't just ignore these places. You should be reaching out to them because, frankly, they get the service. Why would they not get what they pay for?
Let's talk about the Thursday programme, because that has changed under your watch. You were asked by the Radio 4 bosses to change it, and you have. It's not an hour-long edition of You and Yours anymore.
No.
There are two sort of programmes there. Talk us through them. The first one I think that comes on the air is Gap Finders.
Gap Finders, yeah. So this is going back to what I said about the business people. They're the people that basically found a niche. They had something and thought, you know, I've got a product, a service, I want to, I'll say it because we're based in the Northwest. The first person we put on was Gary Usher, who owns quite a few restaurants across the Northwest. I think he's a fascinating bloke because he had a dream that he wanted to open a restaurant, but the banks wouldn't do it. The banks wouldn't back him on it. So he decided, okay, I'll crowdfund it. So he crowdfunded his first one. I think he's now on, I think when he was on with us, he was talking about his 7th, and he's got a pub, and he wants to do a catering company. It's not all crowdfunded now because the banks have looked at him and thought, actually, you are a decent investment, we can put some money in. But half his money still comes through that way. And it's those kind of individuals. We could go for big business and put somebody on, but I don't want it to be. I want it to be those people who kind of had a dream and followed it. They thought, I can back myself on this one. I believe in my product. I believe in my service. And also, if I want it, somebody else out there will. So we're on episode, I think today was episode 15 in this new format on Thursday.
And this tends to be Winifred Robinson interviewing them? Or
Yes. So it's one person. Primarily, if we can, we get them to come to Salford.
Right.
Because we prefer to see them sit face to face on that one. Because it's actually a better listen, to be perfectly honest, on what we're doing for that format. They sit and it is, let's say it's half an hour, it's give or take a couple of minutes, it's half an hour, one person telling their story. The only thing that we do ask is that they tell us who's got their back. Who is it that actually looks after them? Who is it they turn to if they've got a problem? And that's where we get a bit of an interaction. So again, to use Gary Usher on it, I've started that one, her name's just gone out straight. Angela Hartnett was the person who had his back. She was the one that backed him. And then we asked, so do you have any concerns? What is it that you think Gary had to be careful of? What is it you think he needs to, you know, just be aware of, and what does he have to look out for? Just kind of getting a little bit further into it. And it's interesting because on those people who come forward, primarily they've got something to sell. And that's what they do because they've got a product or a service. They're pitching at it. But once you get past that first bit and actually start talking to them about their personal bit, what actually drives them, you get some really interesting stuff. And at the beginning, it was looking at it and thinking, ooh, half an hour with one person. That's a bit of a struggle. That could be. Honestly, the amount of times we've come to the end of the program thinking, wish we had a bit more time and could have asked you a bit more about that one. It could have gone a lot longer. It's a really, I know you're all going to think I would say that because it's my program. It really is a good listen. It's a really proper listen to somebody who's just explaining why they wanted to do it.
So if somebody watching us chatting now thinks, actually, I know someone, I represent somebody or whatever who is exactly that, how do they pitch that to you? I mean, how long should a pitch be for that particular slot, for the Gap Finders programme on a Thursday on Radio 4?
For that one, not that much.
Yeah. You'll ask the questions in a briefing or whatever before anyway.
You know, the run-up on those at the moment, because we have gone through and looked at different things, we do get the odd press release in about it now. It's really tricky that the press releases that have come through saying, I've got somebody who's a client of mine who I think could make this. You're looking at it and thinking, I know that they're your client, so therefore you're going to be invested in it. I can tell that you want me to do this one, but they don't quite have a sparkle about it. They don't quite have something that's just that bit more engaging. And you can kind of tell that from what's been written in the press release, because it's telling you about the business. I need to know what's driven the person to get there. Tell me a bit more about the person. It's more
about the individual.
Yeah. Tell me about how they got there first. Right. It doesn't need, I don't want acres and acres, because like anybody else, we've all got time constraints, not going to read pages and pages.
Yeah.
But give me a few paragraphs as to why that person is important, what they've done that's different.
Interesting. I mean, it's always interesting when Radio 4 makes a change in its running orders, really at all, or in its schedule, because I mean, questions can be asked in Parliament if you jiggle around with Radio 4 too much. It's all about evolution, not revolution.
Yeah, and it can't
You've changed quite a lot in your 2.5 years. You've had to.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, you were saying about the fact that I took over at the beginning of COVID. The first thing I did was on the 31st of March 2 years ago, which was to tell everybody, would you mind going home now? And some point next week I'll give you a shout as to what the new rota is going to be. But don't worry, it's only going to be a couple of weeks to be back in the office. It didn't quite work out that way, but that changed a lot of how we worked anyway. It changed like any other business. I'm sure I'm not alone in this one. Suddenly we decided, no, you don't have to do 5 days in an office. No. You can get out. It's amazing how much of a change that makes in people's lives, that suddenly they're not in the office all the time, and they are going out in the community, and suddenly they're seeing things nearby them that actually make a difference.
It's improved the journalism of the programme.
Yeah. You've suddenly found different businesses, shops, and how they got through. We're all passing high streets and how they struggled and tried to get through the past 2.5 years. You look at the store that made it, and you think, well, what did you do that makes you stand out from the others? Why were you the success that kept going? Success is limited, I admit. Why did you manage to get through all this bit, whereas maybe the guy down the road didn't make it? What was the difference? And suddenly you start to get the more positive bit. And jumping back a lot in conversation, when you asked about what goes into a running order, it's really negative right now. News is really negative. There's not much joy in what you're hearing that's coming out. And I know, talking to my own friends, lots of people are quite happily skipping the news. They don't want to know. They don't want to do that bit. If I can find something that gives a positive spin to what's going on, and it can be difficult, but if you have that success story, that I want to try and find in the programs. That moment of joy where you think, actually, it's not all doom and gloom. Somebody's managed to do what they want. And to a certain extent, that's where Gap Finders fits, because they did follow and it did work.
I think one of the biggest challenges we faced is one of the two presenters, the main presenters on You and Yours, is blind. Yeah. And we had to get him broadcasting from home. And that was quite an effort.
It was.
And we managed it. Slightly terrifying sometimes on occasions, but I mean, it was amazing how the technology, really, it was an enormous catalyst. It was the pandemic, and Radio 4 started using formats. FaceTime Live, it never used to use that. Zoom Live, it never used to use that. Actually abandoning everyone has to be in a studio, because you couldn't have people in studios.
And actually that stays now. You know, you and I worked through local radio a bit as well. Local radio have studios that are used by network called NCAs. They basically just an ISDN line with a microphone on it. That's all you did. You put the guest in there, they talked, it went live. I don't think they're going to be kept. Certainly, you can see some of them have already gone. But because we're all using technology and we can all do that, we won't be doing that anymore. And it changes again the format of how the guest is used. Because if we wanted to go to a local radio station, because, for example, they lived in Sussex, well, they would have to go to Brighton or possibly Horsham. But it's a long way round, and you have to ask them to go and give up the time for that one. Now, if we're saying, you're right to do it on Zoom,
yeah.
Well, they're sitting at the terminal probably. They're going to do that one quite quickly. It makes it a lot more immediate for us to be able to do it, and easier for the guests involved. They don't have to do the trekking around the place. How
many people, you said with Gap Finders, you like somebody to be in front of a presenter.
Yeah.
Are the majority of contributors, do you think to Radio 4 at large, the Today programme, What and whatever, are actually doing it remotely, FaceTime, Skype now, and not going into studios?
Yeah, it's still that mindset at the moment.
Change.
It is a massive change, and it's, you know, I'm not just saying about hours. You can hear it on the Today programme. I think Nick Robinson actually made a point of saying how nice it was to have somebody sitting opposite him the other day. Yeah, it just doesn't happen that often anymore. You don't do that bit. There are certain things that change. You do lose a bit on that one because you don't have that person. You don't have that personal interaction. It doesn't make it quite the same thing. But certainly from the point of view of an item in a program which runs anything from 3 or 4 minutes to maybe 7 or 8, that's okay, because primarily you've had a briefing chat with them, you know some of the things that they're going to say, not all, because I don't want to know all of it, neither do I necessarily want the guest to know all the things we're going to ask. They know the subjects, may not know the question. There's a difference there.
Yeah, well that's a useful poser actually. If someone here watching is briefing somebody who's going to be appearing on Radio 4, how far can they go when they say, you know, a potential guest is always going to say, what will I be asked?
Yeah.
Well, you can ask, but I mean, I don't think we would ever have actually given a list of questions. It just doesn't lead to a great interview. What is fair to ask, and what do you give?
I think it's fair to ask what subjects we want to cover. Anybody who's heard Amal Rajan on Today programme, he will actually outline at the beginning, if it's all right with you, I'm going to ask you this, 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 and this. That's it. And I know you're here to come and talk about this bit. We'll ask you about that as well. But just so you know, these are the first bits. That's roughly how the briefing for our chats would go. We're going to talk to you about these subjects. This is where we're going to be.
These are the areas we will cover.
That's what we want to cover with you. But
and it's reasonable to ask for that if you're appearing on BBC Radio 4.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be that you're turning it. In fact, it would be wrong if you turned up and you didn't actually know why you were booked. You know, that's unfair. That shouldn't be a position. And actually, it's an entertaining listen because somebody's squirming on the spot. It doesn't give you any information if you do that. If they don't know what it is that they're going to be asked about, they can't give you the solutions that I'd be looking for in the programme. So I don't really think that gets you very far.
Pandemic-wise, are we now at a point where if somebody just wanted to come in and be in front of Peter White, Winifred Robinson, can they come into a studio now? I mean, where are we with pandemic restrictions?
At this moment right now? Yeah.
That might change.
I would warn that I think it would.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's any secret. Again, if you look at the minute, COVID rates seem to be a bit higher again. It changes and it's under constant review. It's not us trying to be awkward. It's just kind of thinking, what's the safest way of doing this? Not getting people to put themselves at risk and us at risk by coming in. But at the moment, quite happy if people can come in.
There's a question here from Jenny. Again, that's coming through via Twitter. And so if you want to send a question through, @Broadcast Revo is the way to do it. Social media. We're always talking about it, Broadcast Revolution, that, okay, yes, you know, go on and do a radio interview, do a television interview, but very often, 5 Live Drive might be a radio programme, but you'll be in vision because you'll be doing Zoom, there are webcams if you're in the studio, and it will be cut down for social media. I mean, is that these days there are so many different ways to get your message out there, and social media is going to be one of the ways that you are constantly utilising to try and actually get you and yours talked about, but of course it's going to benefit the people who are talking to you.
Well, you're saying about getting people in. I was in a meeting yesterday where we talked about refitting our main studio. So we put 7 cameras in total in. So 4 will be on the middle of the desk, concentrating on the 4 people, up to 4 people who could be talking at any point. 2 wider shots for the studio, 1 wide shot overhead looking down.
You're building a television studio?
To all intents and purposes, it's a the studio's not just ours, it's used for other things. So Radio 2 use the same space.
Yes.
If they've got bands or something in, you can see why they want to do that. So it is changing it. But we are changing it because we want to use the social media to get the stuff out.
Yes.
And that's kind of the push that we want to do to try and get our message across, and also so people can get in touch with us.
Right.
Because the more social media we manage to push out, the easier it is for people to then respond to that one, and we can do something with their answers. And we can get, if we have somebody on who says, well, this is the solution, this is what we think you should be doing, and then somebody looks at that and thinking, well, that doesn't work for me, or that didn't work for me when I tried it, so we can then get their tweet back. It's a bit like the evolution of Dear Radio 4, when somebody sit down and written something to you primarily in green ink. You used to get those letters all the time.
Yeah.
Then they dried up for very obvious reasons that the people who were using pen and ink, they're probably not around anymore. So you got emails. Well, emails are beginning to slow up as well. Our email box, I think, is probably one of the biggest that you get in Radio 4, because I'm not being funny, people get in touch when things have gone wrong, and people like talking about things when things have gone wrong. So, that's how people get in touch with us. We do get the odd bit of praise for a company or whatever, but it's that. They'll fire off an email. But more and more when people are being, when the solution is trying to be found with us on the programme, one of the quickest ways in which you're told to try and do that is, well, tweet about it.
Yeah.
Because it's in the...
Yeah. Yes, by all means. I'll repeat it for you, just for the audience listening, but fire away.
Although we come from a very different background, we share your ambition in trying to establish a new demographic.
Mm.
I'm just really interested in what you've been talking about from your perspective. I actually know your show, and I'm definitely a Today programme, although not quite late 50s. I've heard you talking about your change in format and content. There's a really, really planned, strategic approach to the way in which you're communicating. And actually, I think your new studio sounds very podcast-like as well. And some of it, like Thursday, sounds like a podcast as well, because you've got the longer interviews, very unusual, but very podcast-like, and the way in which you're open to being communicated with, especially through social media and community engagement. How far do you have to work with those BBC needs every week, and what does it mean for you? What is it that you're doing differently to respond to those needs?
I'll just summarise that question if I may. I think really there are technical demands the BBC is putting on you now, a demand to get younger audiences on. I'm keen to talk to you about gender as well, representation in terms of contributors coming through to you. You've got a lot to juggle there, and how is that all shaping the programmes you're making now, maybe as compared to 10 years ago?
It does change it, because it changes it, but I think it changes it for the better, not the worse. I think, if we take up the idea of gender, for example, BBC monitors now who's on. It's been that way. The 50-50 project has been around internally for a few years now. And you and yours have been part of that for the past 18 to 20 months. So I know what my gender split is.
In terms of contributors?
Yeah. Not staff. No, we don't. We're talking about the people who are on
people
air,
who are on the air,
but not the people who are paid to be there.
And
so
your mission is to have 50% women, 50% guys.
Well, actually, it's 55-45 at the moment. 55 female, 45 male.
That's what you're aiming for?
No, that's what we've got.
That's what you've got.
That's what we've got, and it has been substantially that, give or take the odd percentage point, all the way through. It's interesting because if you had have asked me beforehand, I probably would have said, "Oh, it's mainly men." I think to a certain extent it was, because when we were talking, sorry, this is going to be in very broad brushstrokes, I'm not trying to be pejorative about it. When it came to the point of you had policy makers and policy decision makers on, well, by and large it was men 10 or 15 years ago. That's changed for the better, and it's a lot better for it. But that still was what we were looking at a while ago. I think in my head I had that image still stuck there of, well, it's men, aren't they? They're men in suits talking. Now it's changed. Interesting when you break it down even further and go to the call programme, vast majority are women. Interesting. It's a complete, the audience then, it's about 4 to 1 on the callers that we put on there, so therefore the callers coming in, because there's a few myths I can bust here. We do not set them all up beforehand. They are not from some hired company that we've got typecast Radio 4 audience for. They are people who get in touch. There are people who are probably talking about that subject that we maybe decide that we want to talk to, but the vast majority, they're people who've got in touch either by email, through text, whichever way. We do that. It's interesting to see how that split changes. But even if I was to take out that Tuesday bit of quite a skewed figure where it's more women than men, overall as a percentage, we're still in the 50-50 split.
And do shout out in the audience here, just like that lady did, if you would like to get a question asked, because that's a great way to actually get my attention. Actually, carrying on from that, there is the evolution of the second programme on a Thursday. We've talked about gap finders. There is sliced bread.
Yeah, so sliced bread.
You're aiming for a younger audience with sliced bread.
Yes, it is. That is.
So a specific.
Interesting when you said about the podcast thing. That is a potable programme, is how it's been phrased. So we create that for the second half hour of a Thursday, and it immediately goes out as a podcast at the same time. So it'll get published, it goes out through sounds and everything else. That is led in the fact that we ask people to get in touch with us and say, what do you want to know about? So today's episode was sunglasses. If I buy the really expensive pair, am I really getting something that's much, much better than the pair that I could buy for $5.99?
And who are you aiming this at? As we say, you know, the pressure from the powers that be, please get a younger audience for that.
When I said earlier about the 25 to 34s, that's primarily probably, I have to be realistic in where Radio 4 can go. It's, as I said before, it's not going to get teenagers. It's just, that's not where you're going to aim it at. But I think if you start aiming towards the mid-30s into the 40s, somewhere around there, then bring in subjects that are going to slightly push on either side of that age group. That's kind of where you're trying to get to. So this is interesting because we started this one and thought, right, how do we get this one to work? And in the first bit, you have to put an example up. So we decided, right, what are the main subjects people are talking about? As part of the compete process, we did some research into what do people actually want to know about. The main things that came back is how not to be defrauded. Well, you and yours have got history on that one. We do that one quite well, and you know the reporters I've got have done really well on that one. The second one was how to be greener. They wanted to know how to be a greener consumer. So we changed and thought, right, okay, how do we do looking at the environment, ecological things like that. So the first episode we put out in Sliced Bread was electric vehicles. But because it's the consumer bit, we wanted to know what's the tipping point. When should I trade in the old car to get the EV, and when do I recoup the money from having an electric vehicle? And it's quite, you know, it was quite a challenge, and certainly within the industry, because we picked one, you can still listen to it, we picked Vauxhall, because the Vauxhall Corsa being one of the biggest small cars that you can find, there's a straight EV equivalent of it. We compared and contrasted the two. And we went to experts and said, if you were doing a test, what would you test? So they said, right, you need to do it so that you drive a certain amount of miles in certain conditions, exact same way, figure out what that's going to be, then figure out the cost per mile to do that bit, and then figure out just how long it's going to take. It's going to take you a long time to pay off an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
But is that primarily the important bit when you're the consumer? Because is it all about the cost at that point, or are you doing it because you also think you're investing in the planet?
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because you're talking about trying to get a younger audience. I always think people buying EVs are people with considerable wealth on the whole, because they are expensive at the moment. And I often imagine that that's probably an older section of the population. So you've always got to try and factor in so much when you're trying to target that younger demographic.
And that's why we kind of went for the Corsa level, because you are looking at the smaller one.
Yeah.
You know, we could look at Polestars, we could look at Tesla, but we decided, no, we need to try and get to the ones where people who are younger, that's probably their starting point, or somewhere close to it.
So you want a younger contributor to that program? Have you gone with a younger presenter for that?
Yeah. This was originally called The Best Thing Since Sliced Bread. It was around as a project beforehand at the BBC. It was run by the science unit. But we looked at it and thought, let's get the consumer element into it, because they were looking at stuff that people buy. We wanted to try and get into that part as to whether you're getting value for money for it, and also find out what people really wanted out of it. So yes, it is younger. Greg came with it. It is actually Greg's baby. He was the one who formed this one. It was his idea in the first place.
Right.
But we're working together now to get to where we want it to be. I got figures about it yesterday, just as to how far it's going. Again, we're on episode 15 of it today. 2 weeks ago, we did the snapshot across the audience for BBC it's called activation, where people have actually plugged in and deliberately gone to go and find your product. It was the same week that Adele did Desert Island Discs, so it was the most interacted with. It was the first week of Wimbledon. Brits were still in, so we were still paying attention to that one. That was second, and we were third.
Wow.
And suddenly for something that is relatively new format, might not be a new product, but new format, it's kind of looking at it thinking, right, how did we manage to get to that point?
Yeah.
Because if you've got the two big hitters there, and bearing in mind it's also the start of the unravelling of the Conservative Party leadership, so Westminster was big. Today we're 3 places below us at that point. So what were we doing that managed to get us into that bit? And it's still going back and looking at it and thinking, right, what subjects were we looking at? Well, actually, I think it was blue light lenses that we looked at that week.
Right.
You know, so it's kind of, right, that's relevant.
And what do you do? Do you tweet about this in advance? I mean, how are you spreading the word? This is what we're talking about. Come and listen to us, or download the podcast.
It's 6 of 1. There was an existing RSS feed for it. So there was a residual bit of people who were interested in the previous version of it.
Yeah.
So we built on that one. Because it was new, we did get the drive as well through online BBC. So we got a big push on that onto the homepage, so our first editions went up on that one. But there's also quite a clever, I think it's quite a clever link that the BBC can do. So when it's an F1 weekend, for example, and I'm an F1 nut, so I quite like watching it, but I also read the stuff that's on there. When you scroll to the bottom of that page, they'll put things on there that are in some way related to it. The episode for electric vehicles is on there pretty much every weekend. You can still click on it and go and find it. So there is a big push for other parts of the BBC to publish what we're doing, and now by the same token we're being asked to put trails on the back of our podcast to trail something else, to try and drive that audience through.
I find all this quite intriguing, that essentially what you're doing on Radio 4 on a Thursday lunchtime is you're putting a podcast on the radio, so it is a broadcast radio program, but it's also a podcast as well.
Yeah.
If you were a brand, would you be aiming to go on live radio, or would you be aiming to go on a podcast? Because so many podcasts, the vast majority of podcasts, get virtually no downloads at all.
It depends on where you want to go, because obviously the big push in BBC overall is BBC Sounds.
Yeah.
And
as the great curator of everything,
whole
radio,
thing.
content. Yeah.
And therefore, by definition, on BBC Sounds, they're trying to blur the image between them. You know, you can get You and Yours on BBC Sounds. It's not a podcast, but you can still get the entire programme. It's chunked, ready for you to listen to whenever you want to. Please go and listen, it's very good. But you can manage to do all these things, and it's not necessarily that you have to find a podcast within that group as well. They're going to try and do it so that, probably when you were there, they had the blurring entirely where they didn't tell you what network you were listening to.
Yes.
They used to just put it out, and they wouldn't tell you whether it was BBC Radio 4 or 5 Live or whatever one you were listening to. Now they're not. That's gone back a little bit. The branding will be there. You'll be able to see that part. But it is that idea of trying to build that brand. That brand is now important to them. They're bought into the idea that if you're going to do this and you've got an audience that's already there, try and keep pushing on that idea, try and bring that brand in, so that people who are, it was again one of the figures that did come in for Sliced Bread, 3 in 10 people who tuned in or downloaded Sliced Bread had no interaction or very little interaction with the BBC. They just came for that. So obviously you can see why, if you're listening to that one and you're downloading it, you can see why the BBC think it's important to put something else in there, so that you think, well, I listened to that, they think I might like this, I think I might like this because I've heard the trail, I'll go find that as well, and start building and building and building on it.
Got you. We're fast running out of time. If there are questions here, do feel free to ask. I'm going to do some quick fire ones as well, but stick up your hand if there are any questions here. We've covered a lot of bases, I think, for a lot of people. Interesting one here from Andrew says, is there a way of pitching experts from, for example, a university to be the experts you liaise with, consult, feature on the air, or do you use existing contacts?
A bit of both. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we use the ones that we've looked at before, especially in Sliced Bread, however, because we're looking at subjects that we possibly haven't looked at before. We need specialists in that. University is usually a good place to find them. I know I've just said about emails and things like that. You and Yours at bbc.co.uk is not a bad one to start with. Slice.bread at bbc.co.uk as well. That's the program specific one.
Great. I'll get you to read those out at the end. One thing I was wondering, and someone's asking here without a name, is okay, pitching to You and Yours, when to do it, how to do it, and how long should it all be?
Never that long.
In terms of length of an email, keep it short and sweet.
Yeah. Couple of paragraphs at best.
Short as that?
Yeah, it depends what format you're looking at and whether you're somebody who's a journalist or whether you're somebody who's in PR. There's a crossover, I admit, between the two. Kind of sell me what your top line is. Tell me what it is you actually want to get to. There are very clear ones that I'm not going to do. We're a consumer program. If you're coming at me trying to sell a brand, I'm probably not going to do that, I'm afraid. I have had different companies that are snacks and fast foods that have come at me and saying, we've done research into this and it shows that our brand is the best. I'm probably not going to do that one. So kind of think about what it is you're trying to aim at. But if you've got something that is a top line, affects a lot of people, you can show that it's going to make a difference, start with that.
Do you think the general news programmes, Today, PM, Watto, 5 Live, are they more open to that sort of approach where there is, research from a big brand saying such and such. I find it can be quite subtle. It might be the researcher's reference, but they'll go a completely different way in terms of the casting of the interview.
Yeah, please don't get that wrong. If you have done a survey and you're a charity or something like that, I can understand why you're going to put that one in. Of course, I'm going to look at that one. I mean, from a business bit, when you're sending stuff at us, just because you've commissioned something doesn't necessarily mean it's something I'm going to be interested in.
Yeah.
When it comes to the 5 Live of that, well, we've both been on 5 Live Drive and both set up 5 Live Breakfast before. Their turnover of stories is a lot higher. There may well be something that they can use if you've got that kind of thing or that kind of message in it. By all means, send it to them. I'm not being snobbish about it. It's just it's not something I can fit into them. It would fit into their brief a bit more.
There's another question here as well, which is how much lead time in the end, if somebody has a story, there is some sort of date they're aiming for. When would they be best to be approaching a program like you and yours? Do you want 2 weeks notice? It always used to be there was a weekly prospects meeting, a Monday prospects meeting.
Still is. We still do that one. I would say as much time as you can, especially because we've gone through the streamlining bit. As you said, we've kind of got a Monday and a Wednesday, if you like, as the traditional you and your story days, of which those are probably where the issues that you're talking about are going to go. So I haven't got that much room as it was before when there were 4 days to play with. Now I've got 2. At least a couple of weeks would be good, but think about it as a couple of weeks again on top of that. If you can, 3 or 4 is probably a bit more comfortable.
But fascinating, there are now the options of sliced bread and gap finders as well for people. And actually I can imagine that gap finders, you have a real appetite for actually people, the bum on the seat that you can actually put there. Yeah,
most definitely. By the way, just because I said about being in the studio doesn't mean I only want people from the Northwest. People travel, it's fine. I think in the 15 that we've done, we've had them from quite a few places. Only one has not managed to make the journey up to us, and that was understandable because they didn't live in the UK. So
I always like to have something sort of timely to kind of end on. News announced today that Nikki Campbell's programme, the 5 Live phone-in programme, which is now 2 hours, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I think is the time. That is now going to be simulcast, as it were, on the new BBC News channel. And that is going to be sometime next year.
April,
BBC News Channel. I think so. BBC News Channel will merge with BBC World, and it will be so. Is that going to be the future, basically, radio and TV in some grand hybrid model?
It's been tried before, you know, in points where, you know, times of crisis or whatever. Big events have been done where, again, you and I have been on 5 Live and they've put the cameras on in the studio.
It was terrifying.
It was not something that anybody was comfortable
with. We're in radio for a reason.
Yeah, this face was not built for TV cameras. It does not work that way. I think, you know, as I said about kitting out the studios, it means the cameras are there. It is a resource you can do. That's clearly something they've decided they wanted to do with Nikki's stuff. I don't know that you would do it all the time, but I can see the attractions in doing it some of the times. I can see why they would put Nikki's on. Yeah. Anybody, I do realise that there are other brands out there. LBC do this incredibly well, where it looks like a set.
Yes, Talk TV is essentially talk radio on the telly most of the time.
It's a set. They're using a new set. They've got cameras up. That's what they're doing. I wouldn't. You can never say never. I don't think that News Channel would do that all the time, but I can see why they would highlight and do that some of the time.
I said I was going to mention there was the sliced bread email and the yours email. This is purely, you know, an email will be read and you can make your consideration. But how do people, if they wanted to kind of be in touch with those programs, those BBC brands, it's you and yours is?
You and yours, all one word, and the word and, not the sign. You and yours at bbc.co.uk. And sliced bread, if there's something you want to find out about, it's sliced.bread@bbc.co.uk.
And the gap finders is through the you and yours
email. That's the you and yours one. Yeah, we do that all on the same one.
Pete Wilson, thank you so much for doing that for us. Really grateful. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thanks to all of you here with us and those of you watching as well. If you are watching the live stream, we have a couple of questions usually that tend to pop up on your screen probably as I speak. There's a little poll. If you would give us the answers to that poll before you actually log off. We'd really love it because it shapes actually where we go, who we ask questions to, areas that you want us to maybe do a webinar on in future. That's where we kind of find out information. So if you'd answer the questions in that poll now, we'd be really grateful to you. And once again, if you show your appreciation for Pete Wilson, please.
Thank you.